Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Fragrantica Talks. I am Adam Forziati, and I'm very happy to be joined once again by Nicola Thomas. Nicola has just returned from Esxence, and for those who are unfamiliar, this is the niche perfume, one of the niche perfume events in Italy that we all in the industry look forward to. I have not had the pleasure of going yet, but I think part of the function of me being here is to be able to quiz Nicola a little bit on some of her findings and her experience of the show. And right off, I think the value in doing this immediately is just that there are so many brands that exhibit there, and the niche space has grown exponentially over the last few years. So it's really nice to have kind of a top-down view of what's going on in that category, and get to be introduced to some brands that we might not otherwise have heard of, especially those of us who live far away from Europe, such as the United States. So it's really great to kind of run through what your findings were. But Nicola, can you tell us a little bit more about the show and your experience of it this year? I know you've gone quite a few times already, if I'm not mistaken. So I'd be curious to know what this year was like.
Yeah, so this was my fourth or fifth time visiting, I think. Obviously, there was a bit of a break for COVID in the middle of that, where they didn't have a show at all. So this year, the theme was iridescent. Now, somebody I met there did remark that actually the theme seems to only refer to the kind of entranceway bit, and you don't actually really see it represented anywhere else. So they'll dress the entranceway up in some sort of iridescent, they did like a kind of iridescent shimmer wall with the Esxence logo. And aside from that, it doesn't really have that much relevance. But yeah, it's in Milan. It's at the at Mico, which is the conference centre just sort of outside the centre of Milan, which is absolutely ginormous. It's over 4 days. 2 days are trade and industry only. So you've got to, if you want to go to those days, you've got to be a retailer, press, content creator, something like that. The last 2 days, anybody can go. And it is absolutely enormous. This year, I think I'm right in saying it was the biggest edition that they've ever had. They had something like 298 brands, so nearly 300. And over the 4 days, they had what I think is a staggering number, 10,000 visitors, which is that's a lot of people to get into one very large room. And the way it's sort of structured, roughly speaking, is you go in, you'll get your shiny wall that's a great kind of photo opportunity. And then immediately closest to the entrance, there's sometimes big brand and sometimes big distributor stands. So like the people who distribute Masque Milano took one of those big stands. Tiziana, Terenzi took another, kind of straight in the entrance. And then as you work your way back down the exhibition hall, the stands reach, there's a kind of middling section where you get still huge brands, Pierre Guillaume, Miller Berthaud, Gritti, brands that are huge and very well known, maybe not necessarily in the UK, but in Europe and further abroad. And then further back still, the last section, or the smallest section, are the small houses, the very creative houses. There might be 2-3 people, businesses, super creative, independent quite often, smaller brands. And so kind of as you work your way back, you get almost more out there in terms of perfumery sometimes. But, and that is very broad brushstrokes, and the stands aren't really prescriptive in that, the big ones end here and now the small ones start. It is a bit more jumbled up than that, but that's just roughly speaking, just to give you a bit of an idea. So yeah.
So obviously, the United States doesn't really have something to that scale yet. And I'm curious to know, Nicola, I'm sure we'll kind of get into this as we talk about your experience at the show this year and some of the houses that you thought were particularly noteworthy that you stopped by their booth. But I'm wondering if you have any particular memory or reflection that you had, or maybe experience that you had during this year's show that you think highlights maybe part of the value of, investing the time and money into going to a show like this.
Yeah, so for me, there's a few really. The main one that I would say applies quite generally is that if you go to this sort of show, you do get to smell a wide range of brands, a tremendously wide range of brands, all under one roof, and B, you get to try, generally speaking, the whole range from that brand. So, for example, Astrophil and Stella, a brand which we're going to talk about today, I'd smelt one or two in the past, but I'd not ever had the opportunity to smell the whole line in one go, which was a fantastic experience and one which I really enjoyed. So it's really good for that. It's good for if you know or you're curious about a brand, you can go to one place and smell everything. Now, the downside of that is that it's quite overwhelming and you become very fatigued and you become a little bit nose blind at times. So you do have to kind of temper it with that. And you've really got to pace yourself. But yeah, it's just for the sheer number of fragrances that you can smell, it's quite something.
Well, as a person who's worked in journalism for many years now and who's gone to other trade events in the other industries that I've worked in, I can tell you that I've really enjoyed going to trade shows, even for industries that I didn't have a personal interest in, but that just happened to be where I worked, right? I've not been to a trade event as large as this. I went to Scent Explore back in December, and if you're curious about that, listeners and viewers, you can certainly find our kind of recaps of Scent Explorer 2022 on the site. But in the meantime, yeah, I'm sort of hungry for the chance to go to something like this, and I can only imagine, coming at this from, less of a journalism perspective, less of a I want to write about these brands perspective, and more of a I want to just experience this as a perfume lover. I can only imagine just like the visual and experiential treat that it is to go there, because we've all been to a really well stocked shop before. I think people who are into fragrance, and I'm sure many of the people watching this video are the type of people who go out of their way to find a store that has a lot of brands, be it like a department store or something more specialty. So I can only imagine what it must be like to go to something of this scale and have that experience multiplied by 100 or more, in terms of the availability of options, that are there for
Yeah.
you. So that's really cool.
Yeah, and you're right. It is an absolute feast, and it's a feast for all the senses. In as much as, the perfume marketplace is very crowded, and when you get so many brands under one roof, that really hammers that home. And what's really interesting is the ways in which brands work and work hard to capture your attention, because your attention is just, there's 300 brands, so your attention is pulled in 300 different directions. So how do people make their brand stand out? How do they make them a bit different? How do they make them interesting? How do they make you? And in this case, you could be a buyer, a retailer, a distributor. You could be a journalist. You could be anything. How do they make you come to their brand and stop and give it headspace and nose space long enough to smell their stuff that you then might go away and buy or talk about? And that's really interesting, just how people do that and how they like hook you in. So for some brands, it's having very big, very glitzy stands. For some brands, it is just how they differentiate their stand from other people. So one brand, Carthusia, had brought with them massive, like presumably plastic or carbon fiber type copies of their products. So they had a huge bottle of perfume. They had a huge kind of squeezy tube in yellow that were stood right outside their massive big stands. So you walked past and went, oh, that's interesting. One distribution company had these, like, they had their stand done up as a hotel, and they were giving out, can you see that's like a little key with the perfume brands that they were representing and the kind of the company name on the back, and what they were doing was like spraying these and giving them to you so you could smell them. Other brands were doing things like, which is something I have seen before, you know, in previous editions, like they have these little fabric flower made into little elasticated rings, and they'd spray the flowers and then hand one to you, so you might put that on your finger and walk around smelling it. And it's quite fun to see all these like very smartly dressed burly Italian men with like little tiny flower rings on, sniffing them quite daintily. It's quite lovely, really. And then so some people do it with packaging, some people do it with you know, kind of dressing the stand in their colours. Electimuss, for example, had a purple stand with a purple podium that was lit for all their bottles. It's really interesting how people go about catching your eye, and the amount of thought that's gone into it is just mind-blowing. You know, hundreds of hours of people thinking about, okay, what are we going to do on this stand? What is going to make us look different, and what is going to make us look inviting? It's really cool.
Well, so now I'm not having the chance to have gone this year. I am just hungry to know more about some of the brands that you discovered that you thought were particularly noteworthy, and I'm sure you're going to tell us a little bit more about the experience of visiting them, just as much as, you know, the scents themselves. And I think both of those are very interesting. So how do you want to begin there?
So I've been trying to get my head around it all, because it is, you know, this kind of feast for, as I say, for all the senses. And to my mind, there's brands that are new, that manage to capture attention, brands that are existing that I managed to try for the first time because I haven't tried them before. I've only tried a little bit of their stuff before. There's brands that I know and love that have brought out new things. And then I'd also like to talk a little bit about discovery sets, because I just think it'd be really interesting to get Fragrantica readers and listeners to give us a little bit of feedback on some discovery sets that I picked up. And yeah, just let me know what you think it makes a good one, because I think there's one that really stood out for me as being cool and a bit different. And so yeah, I'd just be interested to see what Fragrantica viewers and listeners thought to that. So should we start with some new brands?
Yeah, that'd be really great. I you know, obviously this is probably one of the most valuable assets of you having attended the show. Is like, you can tell us a little bit more about, you know, what kind of brands do you think are going to be on the horizon. So yeah, tell us a bit about some of the brands that, you know, made an impression on you that are, you know, yet to make their big splash in the market.
Yeah. So in terms of trends, trying to identify trends, which is always, you know, kind of what the function of fragrance journalists in a way is, trying to spot what's coming up next. I noticed a lot of brands talking about spirit, spirituality, spiritum, mysticism, soul, all in that kind of oeuvre of spirit, maybe spiritual well-being, and talking about perfume as a way of looking after almost like looking after a part of you that is a little bit difficult to define. I saw a few brands going, smell perfume, it'll make your mental health better, but I think that's what they were talking about, actually, just in more romanticized terms. So there was a lot of that. There are a lot of companies talking about green issues and sustainability, which is great. Unfortunately, there are also quite a lot of companies talking about their products as being 100% natural, when you can absolutely smell that they are not 100% natural. So there is clearly some greenwashing still going on. And I'm not saying for a minute that all companies that are saying we only use naturals are faking it, but there are definitely a segment of the market that are. And because perfumes, you know, the formulas are kept secret, that's often very hard to disprove. But, you know, I've been smelling a lot of perfumes for a long time. I know what ICE Super and Ambroxan smells like. and you can smell, you can smell they're in, the number I've heard is 90% of all modern perfumery. And so when you smell a scent that claims to be 100% natural and you're like, I can smell there's ISO in that, it does make you glance slightly askance at the company as a result. But yeah, I'm not going to be able to prove them wrong. It's just a strong hunch. Anyway, they shall remain nameless, so we don't get into any trouble. But yeah, on a more positive note, some brands that caught my attention. Partly for the bottle, actually, I was really drawn to this brand. This is Reinvented. Lovely sort of simple bottle, but with these like gorgeous multicolored caps, as in there's a different color for each of the perfumes in their range. 5 perfumes in the range. This one's Eureka, which they gifted to me. They asked me to pick which one I liked the best, and it was this one. Really kind of almost like a little bit of a minimalist feel to the scents. They're not overblown, but this one's a kind of spicy sandalwood, which that's catnip to me anyway. But it's really soothing. I wore it to the office today. Felt very office appropriate. It's cozy, kind of comforting, but also it has that kind of modern feel to it. It doesn't feel heavy, doesn't feel stodgy. Really easy to just chuck on. Very nice little perfume. So I there was quite a few of their line that I thought, really quite enjoy these. Another company that I really liked was Nissaba, who now they were really interesting because they're a brand that is trying to promote regenerative farming practices. So they support different ingredients in different parts of the world, work with farmers and local entrepreneurs to produce better crops that don't leave the land ravaged by the growth of that crop. And then they produce a perfume centered around that ingredient. So they gave me a sample of Sulawesi and one of Grand Eel, which are it's almost kind of sumptuous, like that. They do that thing where the perfume is built around that central note. And I found them very interesting, very... they use a high proportion of naturals in their compositions, but there's no muddiness, there's no kind of murkiness that can sometimes come with that. Just really nice, sort of well characterized scents, and I'm really looking forward to wearing those two. What else is there in my box? Oh, I know. Another new brand. So Boujee Bougies will possibly be known to some people, possibly in the UK. They are a candle brand, or they were a candle brand. Nick and Pierre Long being the perfumer who did one of the zoologists fairly recently. Now, they made this candle brand. It was wildly successful. The candles are fantastic and they smell really, they really do throw the scent out. They were so successful that many people were saying to them, please, will you release these candle scents as perfumes? So, Pierre being a perfumer, and the team being an entrepreneurial, that's what they've decided to do. So whereas how they explained it to me was that the candle is like the close-up view, and what they've tried to do with the scent is make it similar but more zoomed out. So whereas the green candle, you get in that sense of greenery, it's like you're sniffing a plant. The scent, the equivalent scent, which is called verdant, is more like you're in the lush tropical rainforest, and things like that. So they're really, if you like the candle scents, you're going to love the perfumes. Really nice, and again, they feel a little bit like the candles. They're a little bit irreverent. They're a little bit well, they're thoroughly modern. They feel very relevant. They feel very finger on the pulse. And so I think they're going to find an audience for sure. Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to wearing those actually and seeing how they perform on the skin.
Yeah, it's always interesting when a brand transitions from one format, in this case candles, to, fine perfumery for the skin. So I'd be curious to explore that brand as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think we saw that actually. There was a good amount of brands that were moving from one thing to another. One that really impressed me actually was this brand, OHTOP. Now, what was quite funny about this was I saw the lovely sort of rectangular, predominantly green glass bottles, and they really caught my eye. Minimalist packaging, very well conceptualized. And I went over to smell them very early on in the show because their stand was quiet, and was chatting to they were part of a distributor stand. So I was chatting to the distributor, and he was giving me the chat and telling me all about them and saying, the founder, started off in fashion, and he's very successful in fashion, and he started moving into fragrance. And there was a man just stood off to one side being very quiet, and I didn't notice him at first actually, and I started smelling the scents and I was like, oh, these are really good, they're really interesting, they're sort of like urban contemporary, super cool, super cool, the sort of scent that it manages to be cool without being wacky. And I can just imagine sort of hip young things in London rocking these scents and being like, yes, I'm wearing green flannel from OHTOP. And so I was chatting to the distributor and I said, yeah, I'm really impressed. These are really good. And he said, oh, well, you're actually the first person to smell them outside of the company because, you're the first person to come to the stand. And I was like, oh, brilliant. Yeah, that's so cool. And I said, they're very clever. There's one called I Hate Rose, which is an unconventional rose. It's a modern take on rose. I said, yeah, they're brilliant. And this guy, I could feel this man up my shoulder, and I was like, what's he doing? Is he wanting to listen to the spiel as well? Does he want to try and what's the deal? And I sort of was about to kind of leave, and he said, oh, can I just say, and he told me something else about the founder, and I said, oh yeah, the founder's clearly a very intelligent person. And he just kind of giggled and he went, I'm the founder. And he was just like, well, I'm glad I was saying complimentary things.
Yes, absolutely.
So, and I just thought, I wonder how long you were going to keep that quiet before you were like, yep, that's me. Well done, me.
Well, while you were talking about them, I noticed that they don't appear to have a website that talks about the fragrances. I think I found their master brand about their cosmetics, but I don't know if I've seen their fragrances listed online yet.
Yeah, they're super new, and as he was saying, they are only just out. So, yeah, super new, and I think that was something I noticed actually this year. Is quite often. Well, so one of the things that everybody was talking about, actually, almost everybody I spoke to from brands, was problems with supply chain, problems with glass shortages, cardboard shortages, labour shortages, transport shortages. And so everybody is having trouble getting their products actually out for various difficult reasons. And it seemed to be a problem that was worldwide. It didn't seem to just be particularly located in Europe or the UK. And I think a lot of brands presented at Esxence this time with either not knowing quite when their products are going to hit the shelves, or knowing that it's going to be in a couple of months' time. Some people obviously were ready, but some people were presenting stuff with a view to it coming out in the summer. So I think we'll see a lot of things going on to the Fragrantica database, which, aren't quite out yet, but will be out imminently. And that was a really interesting conversation to have with people about just some of the sheer difficulties that people are having. And how, more than once I would visit a stand, and particularly if it's a brand that I've got a relationship with, they'd say to me, oh, I'm going to let you smell this, but and they kind of hold up a tiny bottle and go, this is all I've got of it. So that's really cool. And when people kind of trust you with a view to letting you do that, it's super awesome, and it feels like a real privilege. So I get very excited about premiere sniffing of new scents.
It's such a privilege too, especially in this market that's so crowded. Yeah, that's amazing. So, okay, you've gone through a bunch of brands who made an impression on you, in terms of like the whole experience of going to see them, chatting with them, exploring their whole lines. Do you have any other brands that you thought were particularly impressive, or did you want to move on to like specific fragrances from a number of brands? How did you want to handle the next part?
Well, I'll just want to give a little shout out actually to a couple more brands that I know already that I, for one reason or another, had an interesting time chatting to. So first one being Dusita, who have got Rosarine out, which is a very fresh, modern rose, very pretty. I say modern. What I mean is it's a modern take on vintage. It has that same kind of vintage DNA that a lot of their perfumes have, but whereas the previous rose that they'd done, which I think was called, what was it called? Anyway, the previous rose that they've done was sort of heavier and richer. This is a kind of lighter, more flirty, kind of more buoyant kind of rose. So really nice to smell that. I think it's very wearable actually. Not too demanding. Nice little perfume. And the other one was just to give a shout out to Electimuss actually, because a good friend of mine was looking after the Electimuss stand, and through popping in to just say hi to her, I got the chance to meet the kind of brains behind the brand. So previously, I've interviewed and spoken to Claire so-called Thompson, who is their creative director, but I got to meet the gentlemen who actually own the brand as well. And so getting insights from them, chatting to them, and seeing how a brand operates in that way, particularly a very luxe, high-level brand, how it operates as a business, that was super interesting. And seeing my friend and Claire, seeing the amount of effort they put into just running that stand, and how they were there at from 9 or even before in the morning right through till close at 6:30 at night, just how much effort they put in. So a big round of applause to firstly them, and also everybody else who stood there and ran a stand and whose feet ached and who didn't get lunch because they didn't have time, because they were chatting to people. It is such a phenomenal effort. But yeah, it was really interesting because they kind of gave me that behind the scenes tip, which I was really grateful for them doing. And also, it was really nice to see just how hard they worked to make that stand happen. And it will be the same for everybody there. So yeah. So moving on to maybe some scents from brands that exist previously, that I'd maybe not had a chance to smell before, or new stuff that they've got coming out. Is that okay? Does that make sense to you, Adam?
Oh, absolutely. Let's do it. Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot in this category I think that I could talk about. So Majda Bekkali, a brand whose bottles I'd seen previously. Now their bottles are the beautiful polished pebble. The bottle looks like a glass pebble, and apparently it's all hand polished, so you don't get any seams from the mold on it. They're absolutely such a beautiful kind of ornament thing. And then the top of it is a kind of egg-shaped wooden cap. Seen the bottles before, thought they were very beautiful. Got to try the scents. Absolutely amazing. Some of them just out of this world. Really, really cool. They've been around for a while. I just haven't had a chance to smell them. This one's called Tulaytulah, which I got a sample of. It's a kind of leathery almond, which is a little bit kind of rubbery at times. Has that almondiness, marzipaniness, but it's got a little line of devil may care kind of bad boy. It's not all sickly sweet. And they describe it as a kind of a scent that has gourmand leanings rather than being full on gourmand. And I think that's a good way of describing it, because you might read the notes and think, oh, that's going to be sickly sweet. And whilst it is powerful, it isn't too sweet. So that was one that I found really interesting. Manos Gerakinis has got a limited edition out that he was presenting at Esxence called Citrine, I think. Really nice to be able to smell that. I had some debate with him about the name, because citrine to me makes me think of citrus, whereas for him, he's thinking about the power of sand, which I totally get, actually. Now he's explained that to me. Now, I said to Manos, who is just the loveliest person, this is such a bad boy fragrance. It is such a bad boy fragrance. It's leather jacket, super attractive, but you know he's going to be bad for you. Motorbike riding, little roll-up cigarette hanging off the lip. It's everything in terms of, it's just so kind of dangerous as a scent.
Meanwhile, you're like, it's dangerous because you're like, not you specifically, but the metaphorical you is like the type of person who's like goes to bed early in your jammies. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It's that kind of like shocking experience in a way. Is it really bold?
Yeah, really bold. Somebody has clearly made a teen movie, or kind of a Footloose kind of Grease type movie about the love affair between this girl who goes to bed in her jammies at 9 o'clock and this like bad boy who she's gonna kind of convert, or he's gonna convert her, who knows. And it's that sort of scent, that tension. It's a limited edition. I hope Manos brings it into his full collection, because it's really cool. But yeah, I felt a little bit like I was doing something naughty just smelling it. It was like, I'm not sure about this, but it's in a really good way. So I just think he's doing really good stuff at the minute. What else? So there's quite a few what I would term kind of bad boy or bad girl fragrances about. A lot of, I think I as I said, I think there's a lot of patchouli about, definitely. For me, the scents were kind of divided between, and I think this is quite actually indicative of the time we find ourselves in. Like, people want to be all roaring 20s. They want to be out there partying, having fun, throwing off the shadow of the pandemic. But there is economic uncertainty. People are still getting sick. There's still economic downturns in many countries, all that kind of job insecurity, cost of living crisis. And so there are big, enormous, very characterful, very bold, very out there fragrances. And then I think there's another set of fragrances being released which are quieter, calmer, more soothing, more reassuring, more contemplative, more about being here rather than looking forward, which I thought was quite interesting, the split that I noticed between those two sorts of sets. Another one of the big ones, though, Rule of 72 by the brand 2787. This one's saffron, cardamom, geranium, oud, cedar, gaiac, vetiver, patchouli again, and leather. Again, it's got that bad boy vibe. It's got that slightly dangerous, that sort of mad, bad, dangerous to know. And I kind of think in the teen movie, this one might be the guy who's on the periphery of that bad boy clique, who doesn't quite fit in. But actually, by the end of the movie, you realise that he's a real good egg. And maybe instead of ending up with the real dangerous guy on the motorbike, our kind of heroine who's wearing Rosarine by Dusita, by the way, she ends up with the second, the kind of the slightly outside of the main clique guy. I'm going to run with this metaphor, actually.
Please do. It's wonderful.
Esxence by Coreterno. So this one's got lime, pink pepper, and violet. What a weird opening. With incense, eleme, cashmeran, vetiver, patchouli, and labdanum. So, I mean, I don't know if when I read that, I was like, that's weird. When I smelt it, I was like, yeah, that is weird. It's kind of a bit churchy, but with a cocktail. Kind of there's a cocktail at the beginning, then you end up in a church, then you end up with patchouli and labdanum and kind of in that bad boy sphere again. So this one is the heavy metal listening weirdo who everybody thinks is a bit odd, but who comes through at the end and saves the day and stops the town from being destroyed. I may be referring to Stranger Things there. That's that sort of vibe. It's really cool. Again, massive patchouli, but with this incense kind of over the top of it. Which I thought it was quite funky and quite interested in.
You've heard it here first, folks. The Eddie fragrance has been discovered.
On the quieter side of things, let's look at the quieter stuff now. So, Gritti, Beyond the Wall. Again, no surprise, sandalwood, spices, milky, kind of soothing. It only came out last year. It's 2022 release. It's lovely, really super wearable. I wouldn't say it was particularly what you would call a stereotypically female fragrance, but I will be wearing that a lot. I think it's gorgeous. And then we can't do a podcast between me and you, Adam, without talking about the new Pierre's. Pierre Guillaume. Visiting Pierre's stand is always one of my favourite parts of Esxence because the first time I went and met Pierre, I was so starstruck and so nervous about talking to him because he's just so good. And he's such a lovely, warm, genuine man. And I just, it's like, I don't really know the guy. I know him at Esxence, but we talk about our dogs. He tells me intimate details about the scents. He shows me the formulas for them. I honestly feel now like I'm seeing an old friend. And I love that. It's so lovely, and he's so nice and genuine. That it's always, an absolute pleasure. So he's got 2 new ones out, Costume Liquide and L'air and L'Eros. Now, L'air and L'Eros is an abstraction of Tonka. I'm still trying to get I know what that means, but in terms of smelling the scent, I'm still trying to get my head around fully what that means. I think the experience is like you smell it and it doesn't smack you in the face of being, this is Tonka. But what you get is a few different elements of Tonka, so that by the end of a wear, you've kind of put those pieces together. There's a lilac in this as well, which is really beautiful. And it is like you're walking down a street and you get a waft of lilac from a tree nearby. It's really lovely. In this one there's white cacao in the bottom, which gives you a sort of sweet bitterness. It's a very much quieter, more intimate wear. it's the sort of perfume you wear not for compliments, but you wear it to please yourself. I can imagine wearing it on days when I'm on my own, really pretty, really, yeah, sort of, it's about where you are now. It's about that very moment. It's not about rushing forward to excitement. It's about a kind of contentment. And jokingly, Pierre said to me, I was in my Tonka phase when I formulated that. And I think that that's a really interesting way of looking at it. But I think sometimes you can, and maybe this is me imposing my sort of viewpoint on a perfumer, but sometimes it feels like you can pick up how they're feeling through the sense that they choose, they formulate and then they choose to release. And if so, my imagination would be that Pierre is at a point in his life where he's, kind of counting his blessings and feeling that sense of calm and, a feeling of contentedness before moving on to something that is the next phase. So yeah, really liked that one. Costume Liquide is again, it's quieter. It's an iris type, violet-y type scent. And I sort of said to him before I could, self-censor, I don't really like violets. And he said, no, I don't either, which I thought was really interesting. He said, but try this. And it's not too powdery. If it was really powdery, I would say it would put you straight off, but it's not. It does have a powderiness to it, but it's, rather than being powdery, it makes me more think chalky, like a kind of like more held together somehow, rather than a diffusive powder. It's more held together. And there's a very like timeless sense of elegance about this. Like it feels like the sort of fragrance you could have found in the past in some respects, but also in the future. It feels like you can't, if you smelt it without any context, you'd really have a trouble pinning down that was from 2023. It could be 2083. It could be, 1883. And I was talking to another perfumer actually about how sometimes brands and fragrances get celebrated for their ability to make something weird and wacky and shocking and out there. And sometimes it's really worth stopping and going, hang on, let's look at the work of a perfumer over the course of a career. Do they demonstrate versatility? Do they demonstrate thoughtfulness of composition? Do they demonstrate an ability to reflect on a formula and tweak it, whether that's as a result of them evolving or, regulations evolving? How do they deal with that? How many of their perfumes are commercially viable? And I think, and we've talked about it, Adam. We've said we think this brand is vastly underrated, and actually, they really do need celebrating for the fact that Pierre is a really good perfumer. He's a really, really good perfumer. He makes really strong fragrances that work, that are interesting and elegant and chic and modern and unexpected. And there's something in the breadth of his collection. I'm convinced there's something that almost everybody will find a scent that they go, yeah, that's a great fragrance. That could be my signature scent. And yeah, so I just think he's a really, really talented bloke. And if you haven't checked his stuff out, you absolutely should, because there will be, this is just lovely. It's not my sort of thing at all. It's violets. Bleh. But actually, gorgeous. Smells like washing, almost drying on a line, that kind of crisp springiness. Yeah, it's just really nice.
Oh, color me intrigued there. I also find myself hesitant of violet, but I've been learning to kind of appreciate it a little bit more recently. So that'd be a fun one to check out.
Yeah, I think it would be. And also just because it's not too powdery, and I know powdery stuff really turns you off, it's got powderiness, but it's not over the top. So yeah, it's a super one. Yeah. And then yeah, so another a brand actually that are not new, but that I really enjoyed smelling is Astrophil and Stella. Um Loved being able to smell their whole range at once. Thought that was, really neat. Several that I found really interesting. Need to wear them a bit more on skin, but Madam M, really interesting. Love is Lost, really interesting too. They feel like they're very wearable, but almost that they've got a perspective that nobody else is quite, like a certain way of looking at the world that nobody else is quite doing. So yeah, kind of a unique spin that I just thought was really interesting, and I'm very much looking forward to diving into those a bit more. Let's see what else is in the box. One of the things that people say is we don't talk about enough perfumes that are at the cheaper end of the spectrum. If cheap is a thing, inexpensive. Let's say inexpensive, because I think these scents offer really good bang for their buck. Chaubaud have got new ones out, so Caprice de Marie and Caprice de Sophie. Light, floral, summery, cheerful, youthful scents, very fruity, very heavy emphasis on fruity floral. They're not, weird and wacky. They're just really solid, really nice. Floris has got a new one out, Mulberry Fig, super wearable, really lovely if you like fig perfumes. Just has that tang of a sour berry, alongside a green kind of fuzzy fig. Really nice, really worth wearing. And also Milano Fragranze, I've got Panettone out now. I believe this was out last year as well. It smells just like panettone. It's really good. It's got crystallized fruits and buttery bread in it. It's yummy. It's a little bit festive, possibly. You might not want to wear it on the hottest of summer days, but if you love it, why not? Go for it. I say. Yeah. So yeah, there's some of my immediate discoveries. I almost feel like we should redo this in 3 months' time when I've had to had time to re-smell everything and work out which ones are really sort of growing on me. But yeah, some super creative stuff out this year. Really, it's things that I'm really excited about.
And the cool thing is, we have already on Fragrantica.com just a number of articles from everybody, including one from you, of people who from our team who went to the show this year and, have done their own kind of deep dives into, basically the state of niche perfumery right now. And so the cool thing is that, you can discover many other, wonderful niche brands, whether they are new or have existed for a while, and some of the things that they're releasing right now that are really particularly noteworthy to us. And, every single article is different, right? Every single article is highlighting some different, some different perfumers, some different, houses and different new releases. And I think that's pretty amazing, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing, like maybe the final category that I'd like to just touch on, if that's all right, is we talked about bottles, but discovery sets. Discovery sets are a great way for people to get into a brand, and obviously attending something like this, you get given discovery sets. So I wanted to show you a few. So a brand like OHTOP, for example, just give you individual package samples. They gave me the whole set, so they're not kind of presented in a set, as it were. That's fine. Does allow you to pick and match, which ones you want potentially. But I really like it when a brand puts together a sort of thoughtful package as to how they're going to do it. So here's some that I picked up, and I just wondered what Fragrantica listeners and viewers thought of them, and if there's one that you think is particularly better than the others. So this one, I don't know if you can see, it's a little velvet box that opens up, and inside you've got all the fragrances held in with little elastic loops, which I think is really cool. By Dagobah. I like it because, you know, that's travelled home just like that in my suitcase. You know, the thing, it's like a little jewellery box almost. You know, they haven't moved, they haven't rattled around in the bag, they're protected. It feels quite luxe, a little way of, you know, but also it's quite portable, so I could chuck that in my bag, say if I was going away for a few days and try a few perfumes out without having to take full bottles. So there's that one. This is Experimental Perfume Club. Now their scents are split into, they're kind of a layering concept, but they're also split into top, middle and base, so you can get one scent which is wearable on its own, but it might fall into the top collection, the middle collection or the base collection. So little cardboard sleeve with, and it's probably not going to show up on camera, but this yellow is a lovely like kind of neon yellow, and you get the scents. You know, it's kind of a traditional way of doing it, or, you know, I've certainly seen this quite a lot, but it's nice that they've got this kind of bright yellow to give it a little bit of pop, and then all the scents are in that kind of cardboard insert. So yeah, I mean, traditional, pretty neat, nice way of doing it. And then there's this one, which I have to say, it's very tactile. So this is by Spiritum, who are a new brand to me. I think they're fairly new actually as a brand altogether. Their whole concept is around like mysticism, numerology, what scent you're drawn to, that sort of thing. The box for this is kind of, it feels like it's made out of some sort of cork type product. And then inside, you've got this like neat little row of scents, which I think is quite nice, with just a little kind of one piece of cardboard that explains what they all are. They feel very secure in there. And again, you know, this has travelled back in my suitcase just like that, and hasn't moved at all. But there's something about the box that makes it feel very sort of precious, and you want to like pick it up and touch it, which I thought is quite nice and quite neat. So yeah, like, I'd be really interested what Fragrantica viewers think. You know, what do they look for in a discovery set? You know, is it as simple as an individual sample in a box? And if so, that's fine. You know, or do you look for something that gives everything in one set? And if so, does it have to be well presented, or is it the sort of thing that you're not really that bothered about? Maybe we could even do a whole episode on this in future.
I do think so. Yeah, I think that's definitely a topic worth discovering more about, just because every brand does it a little bit differently, and there doesn't seem to be a huge standardized trend with them. So I'd be curious to know more about, the different options available. And I'm sure, everybody who went to the show this year probably has, endless examples to show.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in fairness, as we're talking now, I don't even really feel like I've scratched the surface of the things that I found interesting. There's such a lot. There's such a lot that's exciting. There's such a lot that's new. There's such a lot that, there is to talk about. There's a lot of details that you end up hearing about because you're there, about bottles being hand polished, about designers being influenced by, certain illustrators from the past and things like that. And yeah, it's really quite a wild ride, and it does take you a while afterwards to assimilate everything, work through everything, and actually figure out what the really, really long-lasting good stuff is.